Alright, welcome to BRUISER'S Boot Camp, and today we're going to talk about the major scale. Um, Western music and really all popular music and most music around the world uh, is tonal in nature. Um, and this means that tunes tend to hover around a certain key center. As it happens, G major is one of those that gets regularly abused and is in most people's heads. Okay, that's, who hasn't heard that? And that's power chords based off that scale. And really, that's the cornerstone of all music. That's tonal. And what we have here is a combination of intervals that make up the scale. And if we start on C, we can illustrate on a music staff and both that and a piano that all the white keys from C to C make up the major scale, like so. So what you have is a collection of half steps and whole steps, and you can take this shape all around the guitar. Here it is in C again. And if we want to go to G, alright, so I'll explain how musically and theoretically we get from to, especially since between those two scales there's only a difference of one note. So let me try to explain how this works here. We have our home scale, which we start on C. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay, so here we have the root note. Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and back to the tonic. Alright, so one way to kind of get this scale under your skin here, before we move on, is to okay, enough of that nonsense for now. Alright, so what we do here is our C scale. But now we want to change it to a G major scale. So what we do is we start in the 5th degree of our C scale using the same pattern. Now what happens if we use the same notes instead of the same pattern? So here's the rule. What we have to do is we have to raise this note a half step. Now we have our next major scale. So that's the rule. We start in the 5th degree of the old scale, and we raise the 7th of the new scale. Alright, so here's C. We're going to start on the fifth of that, which is G. Okay, so that's how that works. And let's say from there we go to D. And you just keep going around until you run out, essentially. And that's how scales are built. So that is essential scale number 1. And I'm going to show you a really cool 3-note per string fingering that will, well, at first is a little difficult to get used to, but once you get it under your belt, it makes scale use a lot easier. So, and there's always there's a pattern to this, but let me just go through this real quick here. Alright, so first things first, we're going to learn these patterns. And the first pattern is this. It duplicates itself on 2 strings, so G, A, B, C, D, E. Okay? What we have here is 3rd fret, 5th fret, 7th fret on the 6th string. And we do the same thing on the 5th string. Okay? Now moving on, that brings us up to the 6th. The 6th degree of the scale. That's a sound you're going to hear a lot of. But in any case, moving on to the 7th, the next 2 set of strings here, the next 2 strings, the 4th and 3rd strings, has a pattern like this. So starting on the 4th fret to the 5th, 7. Alright, and that repeats itself on the next string up. Okay? Alright, so now we have a 3rd pattern here. And this happens on the 2nd string, starting at the 5th fret. This is actually how we're going to end our scale here. So, 5, 7, 8, and on the next string as well. With this fingering, this string is generally used as a turnaround point. I'll show you here, along with the picking method that I use. Alright, this used to be called economy picking, but these days it's called sweep picking, which I've been using this for 30 years. And it's usually one of the first things I teach everyone, because it's really... So the general concept is this. Not only is the note pattern the same on every string, but the picking pattern is the same as well. So what you have is a down, up, down deal. On the next string, you're going to do the same thing, and so on, all the way down. So it's down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down. Okay? And what you have is an opportunity to sweep in between. Let's see. So going to string, you have one motion instead of two. Economy of motion, hence the name originally of economy picking. So here we go again. Down, up, down, 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 down, up. Now we're going back, right? This is where I said the turnaround point was. Now we've changed direction. I'm going to start everything with an up. So it's going to be up, up, down, up, up, down, up, and so on until you get back to the bottom. Okay? Okay, one important thing to remember here is, or to think of with our scale here, is to think of chords. You know, each chord, at least just as we have inversions of chords starting on different notes of it, we do the same thing with scales. And that's the reality of modes. That's where modes come from. So, let's go through our G major scale here again. Right? Depending on what note we start on, we get a different scale. There is our home scale or parent scale, the G major. Now if we start on the A, we get what is called the Dorian scale. Alright, that's just the second. It's a minor scale based on the second scale step of the major scale. I singled that mode out because that particular mode gets used a lot. In rock and jazz especially. Everywhere. It's a very okay, so another important one to keep in mind is the scale starting on the 5th degree of the G major scale, which is we call that the D Mixolydian scale or dominant scale, whichever one. And that goes like this. And so on. And last but not least, and this will lead us into talking about minor scales. The relative minor scale of any major scale starts on the 6th degree of the scale. So what we have is this. That's the natural minor scale of E, using that same fingering, which I'll show you a new fingering here in a minute. But first we got to talk about minor scales. First I'll show you the E harmonic minor scale, and that goes like this. Starting on the 12th fret, it goes like this. And there you have a really cool, exotic sounding scale to break up the monotony of whatever. Okay, so let's talk about minor scales for a second. We'll go back to the major scale in its relative minor. And what we have is a variation of the major scale, and that's how you can look at it. E major. Now, if we take those three notes and lower them, which is the 3rd, 6th, and 7th, and lower those notes, now we have natural minor. So, whereas this major, flatten the 3rd, 6th, and 7th degrees, and you get this. And that's called either the Aeolian mode or natural minor scale, which we'll talk about more later. First, we take that scale and give it its leading tone back, and we have our exotic scale. However long ago, music people didn't like that interval there. Saying there was too much of a jump. So what they did was raise the 6th. So that solved that problem, but created another one, which was solved by instituting what we call the melodic minor. So, which has the raised 6 in it. Now we have a nice flowing scale instead of this. However, traditional thought was that was necessary going up but not going down. So that's how we treat minor scales. Is harmonic minor is generally the source of harmony in modern music, And the melodic minor is, well, what the name implies, a source of melody. So in order to do that, traditionally, we change it on the way down. Jazz guitar players, on the other hand, don't. And they tend to play it the same. And as a matter of fact, that is kind of their jazz, cats. That is generally speaking their one of their favorite scales to use is that. In our world, however, I mean, it can be, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. That's all there is to it. And along with all of those scales come their own particular modes. So spend some time going through, starting on different notes of the scale, and especially the fifth. Serves as a great tool in improvising. Okay, so next on the list is the pentatonic scales, minor and major. While we're still in the key of G, that is the G major pentatonic scale, which leaves out the 4th and the 7th degrees of the scale. Therefore, eliminating most of the problem spots that guitar players run into early. And if you're like me, you've probably just kept right on using them, since there are really so many different ways that the scale can be used. Especially its closely related minor pentatonic scale, which, if we're still in the key of G and we want to do, well, it's relative minor to start with. Okay? And what that does is eliminates the 2nd and 6th degree of the minor scale. Which are, if you haven't noticed, is where the half steps occur in both the minor and major scales. And that's where a lot of people run into trouble, because it's easier to deal with this interval than it is to deal with this one. Even though in the right hands, of course, we've all heard. But so that's the deal with pentatonics. These minor pentatonics can be substituted for other scales, like the big modes and stuff. It's easier to think of yourself if you're playing over a minor chord to just play, instead of worrying about what mode you need. Although some people go to certain modes by default. What it does is it helps you divide the bigger scales up into smaller, manageable individual scales that you can create motifs and patterns from. You know, just to keep things interesting for you and the people that are brave enough to listen to you. The last group of scales I want to talk about here are used in many different ways by different styles, so I'll kind of skip to just what they are and let you decide how you're going to use them. But what we have here is first is the whole tone scale, and that is a scale made up entirely of whole tones. So a G whole tone scale would sound like this. And I'll let you decide how you feel about that, but that's kind of gives you that uneasy feeling, you know, and jazz players use it a lot. And of course, you can use it however you like. Next is the diminished scale, which is an alternating series of whole steps and half steps. For instance, going back to G as our root note here. Well, I'd just like to wrap this up by playing around a little bit and showing you what you can do just with, you know, a few of these ideas here. Until then, see you later.